Welcome to the Roundtable here on theillinoize.com. I'm Patrick Pfingsten. We're happy to be joined by these two smiling faces on your screen, radio talk show host, comedian extraordinaire, and former state representative candidate Patti Vasquez, as well as former Illinois State Republican Party Chairman Pat Brady. Guys, welcome. I've been told that if we do well today, they will take the Pat, Patti, and Patrick show on the road. So. The roadies are looking for us. I want to start, Pat, I'll start with you, since you and I have kind of been a little bit on the non-Trump side of the Republican Party over the last 5 years. Let's start with the suburbs, since that's so confusing after Election Day. It was bad for Trump. He got clobbered in most of the suburban counties. But it was also bad for Governor Pritzker's fair tax, as he called it, graduated income tax. And also Republican legislative candidates are doing significantly better than we expected. You look at all of those things and how they impact both parties. What do you make of it?
Well, the Trump thing, Trump did horribly in the suburbs. Like he didn't do very well in the suburbs in 2016. So he was super unpopular with suburban women. The fair tax thing, I just believe that the governor's team got out messaged. They started early, and it's going to be a tax on billionaires, which had some appeal to it. But then I think the other side wisely put it down to the level of this is going to affect my business, and put out real people to talk about what the tax was going to do to them. And I think that was a very effective message. But in the suburbs, Trump dragged, we're probably going to be in the minority in the DuPage County board. We out here in King County, where I live, we lost a state's attorney race. I thought for sure we were going to win. Lost the county board presidency, so it was a bad night at that level. But on the state house level, it was fantastic. Jim Durkin picked up a net 2 seats when they thought they could lose as many as 10 or 8. So that worked out well. So it was a great night for Republicans overall.
Patti, how did you look at it?
Look, I think that, we're all aware that there are, conservative districts outside of the Chicagoland area. And I believe there were a few areas that actually had, should Chicago be outside of the state of Illinois? So there is a little bit of this push and pull between the areas of the state that are more conservative, more liberal. I think that, in my area, and surprisingly so, in the ward where Trump won last time, the 41st ward, the late mail-in ballot showed that he actually ended up losing that area as well. So Biden and Harris won the entire city of Chicago. I think that with the, as Pat was saying, the other issues that were on the ballot, the other candidates that were on the ballot, the fair tax in particular, I think that there was perhaps a difficulty carrying that message. I think that it's hard to say, you don't want to threaten people and say, look, if you don't vote for this, then all of our taxes are going to go up, which is going to be the case. The state of Illinois is one of only 7 left in the country that has a flat tax. Yes, there are states that have no tax, and they also have a different infrastructure on how they create revenue and bring in revenue. I think that we are going to be very challenged without having had the ability to carry that amendment across the finish line, and it's going to be painful for a long time. So I think that it's unfortunate. I think that a lot of the messaging, the anti-politician in particular, being able to use Madigan as its lightning rod, hurt Dems across the state.
And Patti, I want to ask you this first: what was the problem? Obviously messaging was a competition here, but voters don't necessarily think of, okay, who has the best message when they go to the poll. It's how is this going to affect me? And do I trust government? And clearly nobody trusts government right now, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent. I mean, the trust for government, state and federal, is at probably an all-time low. With the seemingly political fights that Governor Pritzker's finding himself in over COVID and that response, and how it's impacting neighborhoods and restaurants and high school football and all the things that are making people angry, and add Madigan to the mix. Was Pritzker the big problem for the progressive tax as it failed?
I think even the language on the ballot was a big problem, because I had friends tell me I didn't see the fair tax on the ballot, because if you remember on the language, it never says fair tax. It talks a lot about the way other states do it, and this is a graduated tax, and the rate at which we tax different people. I think that Pritzker has done a very good job when it comes to this crisis. I think that when you have a lack of leadership nationwide, that also instills distrust and cynicism, as we mentioned, a lot of areas outside of the city of Chicago throughout the state tend to be more red, tend to be drawn to messaging from the president of the United States. And that's where you have people that don't want to follow the guidelines, that don't want to follow what was set up and was successful at the beginning of this pandemic. We're now seeing the result of not trusting, and to your point about people don't trust government. Well, that's coming also from the national level. We have masks are not political. It is straight up science. And that's been a problem.
Pat, how much was the failure of the graduated income tax on Pritzker?
Well, it was his first political loss since he actually gotten into the race, and it was a big one. Beyond him, I don't know. I do think that that distrust in government, and I agree with Patty's comments, at the national level, the leadership has not been good at all. But at the local level, the distrust of, and that was the message of the people that were against the fair tax, the distrust of government. I don't think you can pin that on the governor. I think the distrust of government probably is more easily directed at the speaker. In a long history in Springfield, on both sides of the aisle, the people in the state just don't trust the government. And I think that was very clear. So you can't put it all on Governor Pritzker other than it was his campaign. But I think one thing that's clearly is clear from the vote, and this thing just didn't fail, it failed miserably, that there is absolutely no appetite in this state right now, and coming off this pandemic, hopefully coming off the pandemic, for a tax increase. And Governor Pritzker banked on the revenue from the fair tax to balance the budget. Now we've got a $5 billion hole, and nobody apparently wants a tax increase. So that's going to make it really tough for the governor, and the Democrats are going to have to make some pretty big cuts to the budget to make it balanced. So the Republicans, I think, are in a good position now to maybe bargain and negotiate for some things that they want, and maybe in trade for some of the things that the Democrats are going to need in the next session.
Well, that's the thing. And Patty, you've talked about government services being important, especially in your run, earlier this year. The battle line is going to be drawn clearly if there's a normal legislative session next year, which the Lord knows how that's going to look. But I mean, the Democrats are clearly going to make this a conversation about raising taxes or cutting essential services, and or both of them, or they're going to be put in a spot where they're going to have to vote for a huge tax increase, not even like 4.95 to 5.15%. We're talking significantly higher than now to close that gap. Are they in a lose-lose situation governing right now?
Unfortunately, I think with what has happened, which unfolded in the last few months, we're all going to be in a lose-lose situation. Look, not only have I, been involved in government, but I'm also a member of a community that is absolutely decimated. I've been a stand-up comic for 25 years, and I spent 10 years in the, whether it was retail or in the service industry. And I can't even imagine what it's like knowing that there is just no foreseeable end to this crisis. And I think that, when we talk about, there's going to be painful cuts and things like that, people keep saying, we're not going to give you more money. And that was also part of the conversation and the marketing with the fair tax. You don't get more money until you tell us you can spend it, reasonably or responsibly. Only we are one of the most austere states. We have made cuts across the board. People have suffered, and now people are going to continue to suffer because this was used as a ping pong ball during the Rauner administration. And it's hard to, and this is going to be a problem for a lot of Dems when they run in 2 years. So your point about tough choices are going to be made, it's going to weigh heavily on their campaigns. I think when we have the midterm elections, that they're going to have to make some really tough choices. And we're trying to, we have a crisis of homeowners and renters and property owners. I don't even know how we put that wall up against this massive cliff that we're all about to step over once the moratorium ends at the end of 2020. So it's really hard to wrap your mind around how tough choices aren't going to be made and how Dems and Republicans aren't going to pay the price politically. But it's something that they're going to have to really, gear up and get the job done to make sure that people can survive.
Pat, do you disagree with Patty's statement about cuts having been made and enough cuts having been made to this point?
Yes and no, but I think the bigger issue that the governor probably could have been a hero on had he done it. At the same time you do this fair tax, you can argue the merits of that. They should have amended the Constitution to deal with the pension clause in the Constitution, because that's the driver. What is it now, Patty? A third of the budget goes to pension payments. And listen, anybody that worked and was promised a pension deserves it. But the reality is these pensions with 3% COLA, and they're too rich for what we can afford, and they're kind of a thing of the past. So until we change our Constitution to allow a different kind of pension system, we're never going to get out of this hole. Because I literally think now the pension payments are roughly a third, close to a third of a roughly $40 billion budget. So that's what we need to fix. And then that allows, frees up a lot of money, hopefully, if they can fix that, to take care of things that Patty talked about, which are part of what government should be providing for its citizens.
Pat, you and I are both downstaters originally. And,
Our hillbillies. I'm a hillbilly. I think you from Champaign?
I'm from north of Champaign. I'm from a more rural place than Bloomington. Okay. I was surrounded by corn when I grew up. But downstate, you hear a lot from folks about how bars and restaurants are just completely ignoring the governor's, indoor service closures and orders. And then the mask mandate has become such a political football. Why do you think that is?
I think that it's probably a combination of a lot of reasons. I think downstate always views itself as not part of, or they feel not part of the decision-making that goes on in the state. It tends to get dictated more from Chicago, even though the capital's in Springfield. But I think the point you're making, though, about people ignoring it and why, I think that was another driving factor for the successes that the Republicans had. Right or wrong, a lot of people in the state are just fed up with not being able to run their businesses, particularly in the restaurant business. And they said, hey, I can go another month if I shut down, or I can just keep going and see how long I can drag it out. So I think there is a distinction in mindsets between downstate and north of I-80. There has been for a while, but I think a lot of people have COVID fatigue. And again, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but maybe, and this is more at the national level, had we had a more comprehensive and coherent approach to this, I think people will do what they're asked to do if there's an end in sight and there's a reason for doing it. And that really hasn't been articulated from the White House. In fact, it was just the opposite.
Patty, how do you feel? You talk about your connection to kind of that, service industry and the bars and restaurants tie very closely into, the comedies and nightclubs and those sort of things too. I live right down the street from Edison Park. I know you're just down from there, not far, and they're heavily their restaurants and bars are heavily impacted right now. Even out in the suburbs, they're heavily impacted, and it seems clear that people who are following the rules and trying to do things right, and you see a heck of a lot more masks up here than you do downstate, it seems that the frustration is building. Am I right? And is it wrong?
No, the frustration is building, but there's a lot of things to be frustrated with. As Pat mentioned, you have restaurants and bars that are defying the orders, which is then how the positive cases continue to increase. It's the number 2 place that people have visited, the number 1 being unknown, right? Because it's family gatherings or they're not able to track it all. But number 2 are bars and restaurants. And so if you have a community that says, well, we're going to stay open because it's the best we can do to survive, that's not wrong in the sense that we get that desperation. But it is, if you continue to have people that are coming in, violating the science, violating the restrictions and continuing to spread. There's a comedian that just performed at the Improv 2 weeks ago. She just broke, her fever finally broke after 10 days straight of 103 degrees because she was so desperate to be able to work. She went and worked at a comedy club, and now she has been battling COVID. It's not just business owners, right? It's family members. I have a friend, and he's been very public about it. Scott Stantis, a former cartoonist, former editorial board member from the Tribune. He and his wife went to visit her father because she wanted to see him. They caught COVID. He felt sick while he was in Vegas. Came home to Alabama. He got sick. His wife got sick. His father-in-law has passed away. I can't explain how bad this is. And again, I get the desperation. It's just, if I could just, and then here we are. And now the numbers are out of control. This is not going to be manageable at some point if we continue to think, we just gotta survive.
Well, the good news is Pfizer announced they have a cure that looks promising.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
apparently they're not going to rush it out. They're not going to seek an emergency. So I mean, maybe first quarter of 2021 if we're lucky.
Yeah,
maybe.
So it is a very super promising result. The market went crazy today, I guess.
Definitely. Let's get back to politics a little bit. Mike Madigan, the enigma that is the speaker. He is in hot water right now. He's under investigation by the feds, or so we think. Clearly connected to the ComEd bribery scheme. He's going to lose maybe a net 2, depending on how the Cabello race in Rockford turns out, seats in the House. Now he's got up to 8 members of his caucus, 7 or 8, depending on one of those races that's still out. Bob Morgan this weekend was the latest to say he's not going to vote for Madigan for speaker. Is his time up?
Here's it too. This is complicated, right? Having run for the House and being intimately aware of how some of the pressures are put on not only incumbents, but also candidates and how you talk. And I was very honest in a forum with my neighbors when someone asked me if I would vote. This is back in January. Will you vote for the speaker to hold his leadership position? And I said very frankly, why would I hurt my community by voting against him? Because I sat in that press box for 3 years and watched how people were treated if they voted or went against him. The problem for me is many layers. One, I do credit Madigan with holding Illinois as a blue state in a sea of red, of holding the line under the Rounder administration. And I think that a lot of candidates struggle because of how much money comes into their campaigns as a result of union support for Madigan and for the work that he does for those incumbents. So I struggle with this because I thought it was interesting that after Tuesday, then you had Durbin and Pritzker and other people piling on and saying it's time to go. I think it's encouraging that there should at least be options, that we should at least have the choice. I think that I would like to see, at the very least, if we're not going to have, term limits, at least term limits for leaders, so we don't go this long with one person in power and being able to consolidate it and really giving this impression really that people can't trust the system. And that's unfortunate.
He's been speaker literally all but 2 years of my life. I mean, I'm a little younger than you, Pat, but I mean, it's
a lot younger than me.
It's a long time for one guy to have power, and it feels like, at least to someone not intimately aware of the inside of the Democratic caucus, but it feels like it's slipping away from him.
Yeah, and if you talk to a lot of Democrats, they want him gone too, just because of that centralization of power. There's too much power in one guy, and it stifles things. And they won't say it publicly, and they can't. But so you've got 8 votes right now against him. Stephanie Kifowitz going to run, which is for the first time I think he's been challenged ever, or in a long time.
No, it's ever. He's never been challenged, I don't think, as a speaker.
Yeah, so you've got 7 more votes. And he won't get reelected speaker, and I certainly, like Patti said, have a lot of respect for his ability to get his candidates elected. He raises a lot of money. I thought the tipping point might be, and apparently it might have been with Bob Morgan, once all this money was out and given out during these campaigns, that there would be people coming saying maybe it's time for a change. I mean, he has been named as individual A in a federal charging document. If that were anybody else, I suspect there would be, I think if it was a Republican, we'd all be screaming it's time for him to go. I remember we did that with Bob Schalander, certainly with Rod Blagojevich. So listen, hats off to him for what he's done, but it is his time to go. And I think you can squarely blame the Kilbride loss, Justice Kilbride, and the fair tax. A lot of that was tied to Madigan. He's got a 70% disapproval rating. And that's tough for Democrat. Patty, you ran. If you get tied to Madigan in certain areas, it's really detrimental to your campaign. So honestly, God, I don't know why he still wants it. At this age, his stage in life, he's probably got more money he knows what to do with. I don't know why he wants it, but I suspect this is going to be a lot closer vote than just 8 or 9. I think this could come down to the wire.
I also, if I may, I also think it will be interesting if he does succeed in holding on to the leadership, it'll be interesting. I mean, obviously you don't want to have blatant retribution, but it'll be interesting to see what the fallout is. I also, I know that, as you mentioned, that there are a lot of Democrats who think it's time for him to go, but they still don't have the will. And even some of those who have spoken out against him are only there because they took hundreds of thousands of dollars from him. So I find it all fascinating where the strength of will comes from. I mean, there's power in numbers, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you see Joyce Mason, in Lake County, she took over $1 million this year. If she hangs on, which we assume she will. I mean, Madigan's not putting hundreds of thousands of dollars on TV for her, out of his kindness of his heart. I mean, he's exerting influence, isn't he?
Well, like Patty said, yes and no. Maybe that doesn't influence. I mean, Tara Costa Howard took money from Madigan. Tara Costa Howard's been and still is one of the lead people on saying that she's not going to support him. But on the retribution, Patty, I don't know, you might have had the same conversations. Some of the folks I talked to in the last 8 or 9 days, as the speaker was calling around to try to drum up support, which is typically what they do right around election time. A lot of the people that were on the fence said, we don't want any retribution if we're on the fence right now. And it had made that clear to him. He was actually making donor calls too, a week before the election or 10 days before the election when he had a war chest of 40 million, which to me is just a mark of, are you with me or aren't? So the retribution thing will be interesting. I mean, he's famous for doing that. That's part of politics. But I think he's been told by some of these folks, we don't want to see that anymore.
Pat, would you recommend to Leader Durkin or other Republican leaders on the House side, would you recommend that they jump on board with a Kifowit or a reform-minded moderate Democrat for Speaker?
That's a great question, and it could happen where you get somebody in there that the Republicans can agree with, but you know what? Then they're going to have to go back though, and it's all politics, and go back and say that they voted for the Democrat for Speaker. So I know that has been discussed. I've been in rooms having that discussion. I'm not sure, but it just depends on how it shakes out.
And in the same way, Patty, I mean, if you're a Kifowit, I mean, I assume that Democrats or Republicans wouldn't vote for a very, very liberal member of the caucus. But, if you're a Kifowit or someone along that line who then has to come back to the caucus and try to work with it, you've got the Gazzardis and the, Kelly Cassidys that aren't going to want to play ball with somebody who teamed up with the evil Republicans, right?
And that's a great word that you use there, because I think, what I struggle with, I grew up on the Northwest side. As you mentioned, you don't live that far from me. My dad was a lifelong Republican. And one of the ways I ran when I would go door to door, because there was a point where I didn't even go, there's this thing called a van where you have all the registered Democrats. But when I started out, I just went to every single door and said, I'm your neighbor. I want to help you. And that's the way I wish we could do politics. I know that I'm a naive and pie in the sky, but the reason I got involved in this is because I saw that there were people that were hurting, and I didn't ask them if they were Democrats or Republicans when they were worried about their kids losing services or their parents who couldn't get help with home care. It's not. Unfortunately, we come at this from different angles, and I am a through and through Democrat, but I also believe in working with people on the other side of the aisle. I believe in being open to conversations and not shutting down. I mean, my opponent, the incumbent, was told different groups, I will never sit down with you. I will never listen to what you have to say. My door will never be open to you. And I don't even know how to function from that spot. And I have worked with Representative Kifowit, and I'll be interested to see how this unfolds, because we are similar in a lot of ways. When I met her, I came down there fighting for services for disabled children. And she was very practical. She said, look, we're trying to figure out how to pay for this. And I think that's what's appealing to fiscal conservatives. And she is she's somebody who works with everybody. She's a Marine. So I think that she's willing to dig in and do the hard work. And I think that she will be able to get some allies publicly on the other side of the aisle, but we know how that turns out. We saw that Steve Anderson, who took the risk of trying to help save the state, and General Harris, when they met with the Democrats in order to get the budget done, their careers were over as far as being in the General Assembly. So there are people who are willing to take those risks. And that's, I don't think that representatives, I don't think any of our legislators should be there as a career. I think that you should do as much as you can, do the best that you can do, and see what other options are already free to help people.
Pat, what about the congressional races? You raised a little stink among Republicans when you endorsed Democrat Sean Casten against Republican Jeannie Ives. He ended up winning in a closer race than expected. As we talk Monday afternoon, Lauren Underwood's race is only about 1,100 votes different between she and Jim Oberweis. These races, some of these competitive races were closer than we expected going in. What do you think of that? Why?
Well, Jeannie, the Ives-Casten race was about 5.5 points, and last time Casten beat Raskin by about 7. But I think those two races, first of all, the 14th Congressional, the Oberweis-Underwood race, that's an R+5 district. Should be a rock solid Republican district. Had we nominated maybe Sue Resin in that spot, maybe she would have done better. I think she would have. Jim Oberweis, I like Jim, but he's run about 10 times and is a very familiar figure in statewide politics. But he's going to end up losing by a handful of votes. Now, Jeannie, and I'll say this, as I said all along, Jeannie did that commercial in the governor race 2 years ago, which is one of the most hate-filled commercials I've ever seen, condemned by both sides of the aisle. And she doubled down on it and said that's the way it is. And she's a very extreme far-right, angry candidate who doesn't I live in that district. And there's no way I was going to support her. I don't agree with everything Sean Casten stands for either, but I think Sean's fundamentally a good guy. And Jeannie doesn't like anybody that doesn't think and look and act like Jeannie, and she certainly doesn't like gay people. So that's why I did what I did. But the point is, she lost, and she lost by 5.5 points. And had we had somebody running in that spot that was not as far extreme to the right, we probably could have carried that seat. So I think that was the difference in those two races, because in the state legislative races, we did pretty well. Jeff Kiker in that district crushed it. And Deanne Mazzocchi, Amy Grant, Tom Morrison, people all in Jeannie's district did very much better than expected. And Jeannie didn't do that well at all because she just doesn't fit the district, because I don't think that kind of anger towards people works in politics. It certainly doesn't work in the 6th Congressional District.
Were you surprised, Patty, at the Underwood race at this point? I mean, it's still razor thin.
Whew. I was nervous. We didn't have a handle on how many mail-in ballots, how those were going to come in. I have been campaigning for now Senator-elect Karina Villa, who will be taking over Jim Oberweis's seat. And
she is an impressive woman.
I wrote earlier this fall that she's run an almost perfect campaign.
Yeah, and she's as impressive in person as her campaign was. She's like the complete package of public service. Just very, very impressive person.
Yes. And I was phone banking for her for weeks, and they actually gave me the list of Republicans, soft Republicans is how the list will come out, so that they perhaps in previous primaries have voted for Democrats. And I was, there were a lot of people who seemed as though they were not going to vote for a Democrat, regardless whether it was Underwood or Villa. But I got a little bit nervous. I had faith because, as you mentioned, Pat, she ran a fantastic campaign. And I think that whole ticket carried a lot of weight. And I think Underwood has made a lot of ground, has connected with her voters. So I was glad to see that she has pulled ahead. And I hope that continues and that she's able to maintain that lead.
I think her presence in the district, I'm right on the western edge of 6 and 14, is literally across Randall Road here. And she did a lot of town halls and constituent type work, as did Caston, which I think paid off because, and I've loved Peter Raskin and supported him as much as I could. I think one of the things that kind of got him caught up when he lost was people in the district were like, we haven't seen much of you. That's kind of a lesson, I think, just for getting reelected. You got to come back and
To he and Randy Holtgren. Yeah.
Yeah. And Randy's, I mean, Randy, and he probably agreed, didn't run the best campaign, I don't think. Because in that seat is that, and Lauren Underwood did have a lot of help, but that seat should never be lost the way it's drawn now to a Democrat. That's just, in McHenry County is getting more Republican.
But to say that, I mean, Underwood has been, has been present. I don't think she lives in the district. Maybe she did. Maybe she moved into the district after the election 2 years ago. But they're, not to be blunt, but you don't see a lot of Black girls from Naperville out on farms in DeKalb County. And she made an effort to get out there.
Yeah, no, she did a lot of town halls, a lot of constituent service, and that. That pays off. So, but all this is going to be different next time because we're going to get a new map. I'm not sure what the Democrats are going to do with those 2 districts, but you remember when they drew the 6th congressional district, Patrick, 10 years ago, that was drawn. That was a solid Republican district.
Mm-hmm. So, Patti, you first here. Since you're so happy about Joe Biden, I don't know if you were marching in the streets this weekend, but masked or not, each party has.
I don't like the Notre Dame game either, so.
I watched the Illinois game, so I was just sad. But you look at both parties. Democrats have moderates, progressives, and even the kind of Democratic socialist wing of the party, which is taking a more prominent role. Republicans have the pro-Trump, the Trump everything crew, along with the mainstream and the business groups, and everybody's fractured, even inside their own party. How do all of the wings of the Democratic Party, come to work together with a Democratic president who doesn't fit the values of a lot of what are main, the main part of the Democratic Party today? I mean, who was it? John Meacham said on TV this weekend that his Springer Spaniels are more radical than Joe Biden. He's not a really strongly willed progressive guy. He's someone that's going to want to build and maybe push back against some of the fighters, the AOCs of the party. How do you guys come together?
Well, I don't know that we do come together. I think that you need some of those folks, the progressives, who are going to push the limits of where moderates are, right? To open their eyes to see what can be accomplished. And I think AOC, as much as people want to push back on her and say, oh, don't start rocking the boat now. What? Well, then when? I mean, being told that's not what radicals do. They don't wait to be given permission to, say we need to do more. We need to keep moving this ball down the field. And here's how I can help. And I appreciate that she's doing that as well. And I also, I like the dialogue. I do think that there are this idea that Democrats are radicals. I believe, that my ideals, are reflected in many ways with the president, but I want everyone to be able to have access to healthcare. How do we pay for that? We got to struggle with that now that we're in the middle of a crisis. A lot of these things that people want, that the things that we stand for, will continue to be important regardless of the level of Democrat that you are. It's the level, the rate at which we're able to push each other. I mean, Pat talked about some of those conservatives from within the party that are really put hateful things out there. And I won't tolerate any of that in my party either. I don't think it's acceptable. So that's where I come from.
Pat, same for you. I mean, Southern Illinois was Trump country. It probably, it probably saved Rodney Davis. It probably took a couple of Democrat House seats out, but the type of Republican in, way southern Illinois, St. Clair County, Monroe County, Randolph County down there, compared to a Republican in Kane or DuPage County, aren't necessarily the same thing. So how do Republicans deal with that?
Well, just on the Rodney race, so too, actually that district, particularly up in the Bloomington area, was pretty much 50-50. So, and Rodney won big. That's a race where clearly Rodney gained traction by tying his opponent to Mike Madigan. Those ads at the end were brutal. But I think for the first time probably ever, it's going to be easier for Republicans to unite in the next election cycle than it's going to be for Democrats, because I think Republicans can still unite around the core values. We can kind of talk about Trumpism, but Trumpism in itself was Trump's behavior in the tweets and in the divisive language and the hate speech and the things like that. Well, now that's gone. And so people like me that maybe support some of the policies, I like the tax cut, I like some of the other things he did. I don't like his
judicial nominees.
Huh?
The judicial nominees.
Make Patty's head will explode, but I'm a conservative. I like. It's not conservative politically; it's conservative in its interpretation of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. But the point is, the Democrats, and I said this when AOC, who is a force, like her or not like her, she's going to drive. And Barack Obama is the one that said, "Guys, we can't go too far left." We saw what happened in 2010. In 2010, when the president pushed through Obamacare without a Republican vote, agree or disagree, that was the calling card for Republicans to unite around. And we picked up 63 House seats. And in Illinois, we won everything but the governor's race. And had we probably had, and Bill's a good friend, but had we probably had, a Kirk Dillard or a more moderate, or at least perceived moderate Republican, we probably would have won that too. Point is, this year, I think it's going to be, I think Republicans sense a real momentum in 2022, because I don't think we're going to have the squabbles that I think the Democrats, and AOC gave a big interview this weekend in the New York Times, already stirring it up. And Patty, I'm all for aggressiveness, but man, you get that division. You see, having lived through a few of those, it's not good for your team if everybody's fighting.
Pat, just, before I let you guys go, let's look forward to 2022 now. I mean, you've got a governor who is, I think, losing support in the suburbs right now. You kind of look at those upset moms who are angry that football season got canceled, or the bar and restaurant owners that are upset. The fair tax fight showed that J.B. Pritzker's money isn't everything. Is he vulnerable? And if so, who can beat him?
Vulnerable. He's still got pretty good approval ratings, and he can write himself a check for $1 billion. I know Patty's the only other person I know that can do that.
Yeah.
She needs to work on her approval ratings.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is the first chink in his armor. And from a guy that's actually, I remember the first interview, it might have been you, Patty, it was somebody on WGN. And I was listening, and I called up some people, this guy's pretty good. He's pretty good at what he does, but I do think that he's going to have some struggles in the next session. I do sense that the Republicans feel there's some momentum here. And I think what happened towards the end were things you talked about, Patrick, about the restrictions that people blew back on. People don't like the word socialism at all. That's how Trump won South Florida. So I think he's more quote unquote vulnerable than he was before. The guy that I think could probably give him a run for his money right now is Adam Kinzinger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm a big Adam Kinzinger fan. I've known him since 2011, and sharp guy, but also has now 10 years of a congressional voting record, which can surely get used in Democrat ads. Patty, what do you think?
Well, this goes, I think this sort of ties into our conversation that we've been talking about, whether it's Madigan or AOC at the national level, Madigan at the state level. I mean, you now have Democrats at the state level that are trying to figure out where their unity is. And it's going to be interesting to see that shake out, as well as where the district lines fall. That is going to impact a lot of the power in the area. So I think it's going to be a waiting game. I think that Pritzker's going to be, I think he's going to be able to win this one again. And I think that, it was a lot of his money in the fair tax, but it was also a lot of Ken Griffin's money in the campaign. The IPI had a lot to do with that, as well as getting the messaging out the way they did it.
IPI didn't do a thing.
They like to think they did, but they didn't.
I would say
IPI didn't have anything to do with that.
the number of people
claim credit for it, but
the number of people who think that IPI is a legit journalism outlet, I think just the shares, because people do share those articles as though, well, look what this article says. That's the IPI.
yeah.
It has an impact. I'm
sorry, Patrick.
No, you're good. I mean, it shows. I mean, that there's, and I don't claim that what we're writing on the Illinoize or in this newsletter are necessarily straight up journalism. I have a bias. I have opinions. I've made them clear, but at least I disclose them, which is a little different than what some of the other groups are doing. So
yeah, I've been subject of many of those news articles, and I'm like, wow, they wrote this big news article and never even bothered to comment, even for a smart aleck comment. I couldn't.
Yeah. Good times. All right, Pat Brady, former Illinois Republican Party chairman, Patti Vasquez, former state rep candidate.
Hey, Patty, when you get back on the stage, I got to tell everybody to go. I want to see you.
I'm doing all digital shows for now. I canceled everything for the rest of the year. There are people that I did one 2 weeks ago and had to self-quarantine and get tested and everything. I just can't. My son is medically fragile. I can't take the chance.
Where do we find your stuff?
You can go to my website, which is the Patti Vasquez, Patti V Show page, pattivshow.com, or Facebook, the Patti Vasquez Show.
And Pat, how do we find the Lincoln Forum, which you're involved in?
LincolnForum.org or Pat_Brady or Next Generation Strategies, or just look me up and find me.
Pat Brady, Patti Vasquez, thanks so much for the time.
See ya, Patty. Always fun. Thanks, Patrick.
Take
See
care.
ya. Appreciate it. You too.